This is Chanel Bunger with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast, and today I'm delighted to speak with Amber Walsh, a partner at McGuireWoods, who joins us regularly to speak on trends that she's watching in the healthcare private equity space. Amber, thank you so much for joining me today. Why don't you take it away and quickly introduce yourself and tell us about what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Chanel, and it is fun to be interviewed by you today instead of Scott. This is fun for me. So I am a partner at McGuireWoods. I really work at the intersection of healthcare and private equity primarily. So I'm a healthcare and regulatory deal attorney. And today I thought it would be fun to talk about trends that we are seeing in due diligence in healthcare M&A, both private equity and regular strategic transactions.
Thank you. And what are some of the things that are driving these trends?
Yeah, so the climate is really interesting right now. We've talked a lot, both myself with Scott and a lot of your guests have talked about the peak in healthcare mergers and acquisitions activity that happened in 2021 and in the first half of 2022, and then the stabilizing that happened right at a year ago. And a lot of the due diligence trends that we're seeing now come out of that same shift in absolute freneticism. There was a ton of deals getting done. They were being done at a very, very fast pace. And now we're back into more stabilizing. But we've also learned a lot from some of the opportunities and challenges presented by the pandemic and presented by that period of really, really heavy, fast deal timelines. And what is driving some of these trends, in addition to those elements, there's also been a real resurgence of buyers focusing on value creation, not just paying the highest price, but really creating value, as opposed to simply treating due diligence as a risk mitigation exercise. It's also being driven in a lot of ways by sellers, because a lot of these deals, sellers aren't just selling to the buyer, they are choosing a partner, and they are choosing a partner in many cases where they get rollover equity if it's a private equity deal. So the 6 trends that I'm going to talk about are being driven by all of those different things going on in the healthcare deal-making climate right now.
Perfect. Got it. And what are these trends that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I would break them down into trends that really are pushed by the sell side versus trends pushed by the buy side. And of course, there are advisors behind every seller and every buyer. There are a series of advisors, and behind every buyer, you might also find lenders. You might also find rep and warranty insurers. There are a lot of different stakeholders. But simplistically, breaking it down into sell-side trends, the first thing I would say that we see sellers doing more and more these days are putting together a pre-packaged collection of due diligence for the buyer, not just waiting on the buyer to send a due diligence list and have the seller be reactive to that, but instead being proactive and saying, okay, we, at the same time that we are engaging our investment banker to go to market, at the same time that we are getting ourselves ship shape, we're going to put a diligence packet together to try to preempt a lot of the things that we know a buyer is going to ask for. And in many cases, taking it one step further and organizing it into a virtual data room and tracking it tied to the purchase agreement that the seller pushes. Really kind of flipping and taking more of a proactive role. So that really is kind of the first trend that we're seeing on the sell side. And if you'd like, I can go on to the second sell side driven trend.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
So the next is to kind of take it to that very next level and engage in sell side audits, cybersecurity risk assessments, quality of earnings, things that historically were largely things engaged by the buy side to look into the seller, and now are really being engaged by the seller ahead of time to, again, make sure that you both understand where the seller may have some weaknesses, some things that need to be tackled, but to put the seller in a better position to really, go toe to toe with the buyer, or at least have a more intelligent, informed conversation. And that can also extend to putting together legal memos about regulatory aspects of the deal. Really, really, really just this is a second kind of iteration of how they're trying to get ahead of what the buyer may be asking for. And then really the last thing that I would say we're seeing more on the sell side is a deeper investment in what some people call reverse due diligence. And by that, it simply means when the seller diligences the buyer. There's always been a little bit of that in healthcare transactions, but we're seeing that more and more, particularly because in certain kinds of private equity transactions in particular, there's an aspect of the compensation paid to the sellers that is rollover stock in the buyer. And there's a lot of promises made about that rollover stock. And in recent years, those promises have come to fruition for some platforms and not for others. So we're starting to see more seller investment in diligence performed on the buyer, paying their lawyers to do it, paying their accountants to do it, et cetera. So that's really kind of the last of the big sell side trends and diligence that we're seeing. And I can tell you a little bit about the buy side now if you'd like.
Of course, go ahead.
So one of the buy side trends that we're seeing more is a deeper diligence on not just the state of the business as it presently exists, but in really verifying and proving out the growth projections that the seller is giving the buyer, a deeper diligence on the pipeline. A lot of these deals, sellers are saying to buyers, hey, a lot of what you're buying is growth opportunity. And here's our pipeline. Here are 3 deals that we have under letter of intent. Here are 2 more that we are competing for that we think we're likely to get. Here's our strategy to expand into, the next 3 states. And we're seeing buyers go way deeper in assessing that pipeline, in part because some of these pipeline projections have not played out as they have hoped in some prior deals. And after getting burned a few times on pipeline promises, we're seeing buyers spend way more time kicking those tires. And that closely relates to the next trend we're seeing, which really isn't a trend. This, in my view, is returning to the norm, frankly, which is to go back to spending a significant amount of time getting to know management and not skipping the opportunity to be together, to sit down, to get to know your management team and really treat them either as an important part of the platform that you're buying as an investor, or at least to be able to identify what you're going to have to invest in to make management team improvements. So that's kind of the second trend. And then the last is pretty obvious, and probably anybody listening could have guessed this one. It came out of COVID, and everyone is talking about generative artificial intelligence, AI, these days. Of course, we are seeing more and more use of technology tools, non-human technology tools to perform due diligence. There are some older, I don't want to use the word archaic, but semi-archaic software that is still used, that's been around for 5 or 6, 7 years. There are other newer tools that are on the market. And of course, there's a whole host of confidentiality concerns and all sorts of things that go into using those tools. But more and more, we are seeing those tools used by buyers in diligence. So those are really the big trends we're seeing that are driven both on the sell side and the buy side right now. We're just happy that deals are getting done, that we can do this diligence and actually engage in these trends.
Thank you so much for walking us through all of those trends. Is there anything else you want to leave with the listeners today?
No, other than the fact that it's been fun to be interviewed by you, Chanel. I appreciate it. And we'll let Scott know that you're a fabulous interviewer too.
Well, Amber Walsh, a brilliant regular guest and partner at McGuireWoods on 6 trends she's watching in the healthcare M&A diligence space. Thank you, as always, for keeping us updated and for joining me today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.